Hey, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Lead Your Movement. I'm Angelique Ruhr, CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, where we help experts and small business owners to win corporate clients. And this is our weekly show where we talk to entrepreneurs and business leaders who are using their platforms in order to make a big dent in the world. And today we're going to have a conversation about something that is very timely and important, and that is around employee health, physical health, mental health, emotional health, and well-being. Something that now that we're heading in on almost the ninth month of the pandemic is increasingly important by the day. There's no doubt that the last 8-9 months have taken a tremendous toll on employees. We're seeing a huge exodus of women from the workplace who are dealing with all sorts of family challenges. They're bearing a disproportionate load of schooling kids at home instead of in the classroom, caring for loved ones, and all of the other challenges that we're seeing, the economic challenges, the disconnection that's out there. And in many organizations, what we continue to hear from top leaders is that the workload has actually exploded inside of companies. So without having that sort of normal end to the workday, that regrouping time, that sort of decompressing time during the afternoon commute, and really being able to disconnect for a bit from work, it's all bleeding together. So it's really becoming a pandemic within a pandemic when we think about the state of employee health and well-being. So for today's episode, we are talking to someone who is absolutely on the cutting edge of what is happening inside of organizations, both in the private sector, being, for-profit corporations and mid-market companies, as well as on the government side. And so this is a boutique business that is a woman-owned business that is working on the forefront. Someone who has seen demand skyrocket for their firm services since the pandemic hit, because they are an undisputed expert when it comes to employee well-being and using that in order to change company cultures. Our guest today is an award-winning CEO and management consultant, Fran Dean Bishop, who has established a 20-year track record as a business leader, a publisher, a speaker, and a technology innovator. Fran founded Aerobodies, Inc. in 1997 as a provider of health management and business consulting services to both private and public sector organizations. As a response to market and customer requirements, under her leadership, Aerobodies has developed several proprietary health technologies and program innovations. She currently serves on multiple nonprofit boards and is an avid reader, cyclist, and traveler. Welcome to the show, everyone. Fran Dean Bishop. Fran, it is so good to have you on the show.
That was a mouthful. It's so great to be here, Angelique. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You have been doing this for a long time, Fran. This is not something that you just start doing. I know it ages all of us when we say it, but you've been doing this for 20 years, and your movement has continued to evolve over those 20 years, going deeper into the transformation of these organizations. How do you characterize the movement that you are leading now?
It's a great question to lead with, Angelique. And I would say Aerobodies, we build resiliency and promote inclusivity for today's American worker. And particularly when you think about everything that's going on and what the worker is facing today, remotely, virtually, planning workplaces, we're really at the forefront of building that inclusivity in terms of the workplace, the structure of the workplace, and how that really is going to look different going into 2021 and beyond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say that the script is unwritten for what it's going to look like. I mean, this is all new territory.
Yeah, it is. But I will say, it's interesting. I've been attending quite a few conferences, as you can imagine, on workplace well-being this year. And it's interesting when you take a look at the swing of things and how companies who were already ready and were already presenting themselves in the new economy, so to speak, to do things differently, have changed very quickly and have amended, modified, and kept moving. And those, as you mentioned in the opening, of our clients that are like the government agencies that take much longer to turn, I've been very delighted to see that they too have also been able to be a little bit more nimble and be willing to change their trajectory in terms of how they're looking at things. So the conversation is already starting now into 2021.
Exciting to hear. That's really exciting to hear. It's reassuring to hear, right? Because so often we see government not out in front, we see them behind. I know people are going to have a lot of questions for you today in our audience, and we're definitely going to get to those so that everyone really has context for this conversation. I'd love it if you would take a moment just to talk about some of the things that Aerobodies Inc. does, because a lot of times in the small business owner marketplace, Fran, when you hear people talking about health and wellness, you hear them doing workshops or trainings and a lot of services, which is great and very important. The work that Aerobodies is doing is very robust in this space. You've actually tackled some things that a lot of small businesses don't tackle. Can you share a little bit about those service offerings that your company is providing and has been providing now for 2 decades?
Sure. So being a small business, we have learned to be nimble. So yes, we started out as a pure wellness and fitness play. And as we moved into the corporate environment, and particularly in the government environment, we realized that our services and the way we approach them, there was a need for us to be nimble and be modified in terms of what we do. So in particularly in the last couple of years, we've been very responsive to working on the front lines and working with working and supporting frontline responders, whether that's actually having people responding in the field, working in laboratories, particularly with partnering like with CDC or HHS and the like, organizations like that, or also providing that nursing supportive or staffing care. So Aerobodies is not just a pure fitness play. And what we find is that really helps us understand holistically what's happening with the employees today. So if you're looking at an organization that has a footprint of a bricks and mortar and they actually have facilities in the organization, that's one thing. But a lot of organizations don't. A lot of the organizations have distributed employees. We call it a distributed workforce today. So they may be globally or they may be in different parts of the country. So how do you serve and support those employees in doing things that provide a more virtual experience, but at the same time, it's the same experience as the headquarter employees do. So we started doing this, I would say 7 to 8 years ago. And, obviously once COVID hit, we were already experienced in this way. So when we started getting orders to do things a little bit differently or a little bit more non-traditionally, and I'm not talking about the PPE stuff. We're not really in that PPE for anything at all. We really do work with the employee who's servicing the public. So on the front lines, we were ready and able to do that because we've already been in that space for quite some time.
Yeah. And just to, for the benefit of our audience, I'm going to just add a couple of things if I can, and you correct me if I mischaracterize any of this, but there are organizations now, obviously the pandemic, and we're going to talk about this in a second, has shifted some of this temporarily. But your firm has literally taken over the outsourcing of managing fitness centers for employees. You have staffed trainers, like physical trainers. You have staffed nurses. You've set up on campus sort of health centers, kind of like, you had the campus, if someone's sick at work, they have a place to go. You guys have also completely done a turnkey solution for workplace gyms, like an on-site office equipment gym. You guys have replaced physical equipment in those centers. You have sourced those things. You've literally helped set up physical spaces. And I think a lot of people think that would be, the types of services, Fran, that a small business wouldn't necessarily have the capabilities to do, but you created that. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think that's going to blow some people's minds that you're putting, nurses and therapists and fitness trainers on site at workplaces.
That's a great question. So it reminds me of something. I was in a conference last week and the question comes up a lot. How did you get started? When did you get started? And it's funny, we've done so much in 20 years. Sometimes my team has to remind me, well, Fran, we've done that. We did that, a couple of years ago. What if we just tweak it and make it look like this? So you're absolutely right. I think as a small business, sometimes Companies think automatically that you don't have the know-how, you don't have the sophistication, you don't have the bandwidth, you may not have the intellectual property to be able to move that forward. We were setting up virtual fitness platforms in 2004. They're all the wave now. They're exciting now, but we did that for financial organizations back in early 2004. We were running fitness facilities in 1998. So what happened is that the pendulum in terms of popularity and budgeting, because once it becomes a groundswell of people understanding, obviously the offering, then the money has to follow it, right? So once you follow the money, then everybody follows the money. But we were already there being very innovative as a small company back then. There was a time where we stood up 17 individual fitness work sites simultaneously across the country, Puerto Rico and in British Columbia and in England at the same time. And as a small company, we just did it. So, now to see so many players in the field, which is great. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity, but it's no surprise to us because it's where I think employers are recognizing that they have to be to really service their employees. And I think the thing I'm most proud of at this date is that when you see what companies are finally waking up to, there was an interesting quote I wanted to share from Wall Street Journal that Sheryl Sandberg recently shared. She said, some companies may think that worrying about employee burnout is a luxury they can't afford right now. In fact, it's mission critical. If companies rise to the moment, they can head off the disaster of losing millions of people, in quotation marks, women, and setting gender diversity back years. That was from the Wall Street Journal, and that was from a article and report about women in the workplace 2020. But it's very indicative of where the mindset of employers are today. You don't have the luxury of now thinking, well, is well-being something we should do? They're recognizing that you have to have a resilient workforce. You have to maintain these people. So going back to my point, I'm really proud of the fact that not only have we been able to stand up and staff frontline workers, but we're also supporting them in the background, secondarily, by many of the scorecards, assessments, strategies, programming that we put in place to make sure they can stay in their job and do an effective job, while at the same time we're doing some really cool strategy and engagement work for some very well-known brands that we can't mention due to NDA, because they have leaders in the field that are responsible for, I have one leader that's responsible for 1,000 micromanagers throughout the world. And so it's really important for the bottom line of that organization to make sure he is well cared for. And that's our responsibility in terms of the resiliency. So I'm really proud of that work. And that work has come from us investing the time and energy to know how to do it and do it well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And Liliana, I can't agree more with you. She just said, wow, I can't even imagine the logistics of setting up 17 spaces across the country in 1 month. That's why I wanted you to share that, Fran, because I think that so often small business owners especially sometimes put sort of an upper limit on what's possible for their organization.
Mhm.
And Aerobodies is out there really competing with much bigger companies and really winning because the systems you've put in place, the proprietary methodologies you've put in place, the track record of results that you've put in place in really tough environments. Government can be a tough environment. Corporate can be a tough environment. And
Yeah.
you all have tracked your success and you've seen that. You just talked about Sheryl Sandberg's quote. I'm so glad you shared that. Burnout isn't a luxury. Dealing with employee burnout is not a luxury right now that companies can afford to put off. And I think we've all seen the fatigue. It's not just normal work burnout. I mean, we've got fatigue on top of fatigue. And here in the US, I would add political fatigue. There's political fatigue. There's the pandemic fatigue. There's the work fatigue. I mean, it's tough. So what should companies be focused on doing right now? When you look at, when you're talking to CEOs out there and you're talking to agency heads out there,
Mhm.
what are you telling them that they most need to be focused on right now?
Well, I've got a slide I'd love to share with your
Yeah, please.
consistency real quick. Let me just share this for everyone to see, because I think this is a really powerful point, and I don't want to just say it. I want people to see it.
Oh, that
Um,
sounds great. And Kathy Norris, just while you're pulling that up, I'll share Kathy Norris's comment here. She said, "Love the concept of making sure your top leaders who manage thousands of employees are physically and mentally well cared for themselves." I agree, Kathy. I mean, that's just it's the burden on the managers right now and the leaders. They're really feeling it. They're trying to be there for their people. Oh, this is great, Fran.
Yeah. So to your point, again, we do quite a bit of these kinds of conferences or conversations. A lot of time we're asked, how do we strategize? How do we even think about what our employees are going to be needing for next year? I just got a call from a company just yesterday, a financial company that asked us to put together a proposal for them they've got 1,000 employees nationwide. They want to put together some sort of programming for them. And the first thing I say, taking a question out of your book is, what's the impact you're trying to drive? And so we put this competency list together a couple of months ago when we think about the employee in 2021 and what they're going to really need. Part of this, for those of you who are in the coaching space and understand emotional intelligence and EQ, can see it. Part of this comes from the EQ Digest, but I've added 1 and 2, resiliency and well-being. And I've also given kind of some tags so you kind of see where we're going with this, because it's not enough now for an employee to have a coach. It's not enough now for an employee to have a gym membership. It's not enough anymore for an employee to be able to get either behavioral health or biometric screenings. They need it all. They need it all. And I'm finding that top employers, and they don't have to be the largest employers, right? But they have to be employers that really get it, that really understand the inclusivity. And when I'm using inclusivity as a tag word, I'm using it from the standpoint of what we're seeing now in the well-being space, addressing the whole employee. Don't ask your employees to come to work with only a piece of themselves. Don't ask your employees to come to work and not have to think about all the issues they're dealing at home, right? And that's the whole piece of them being able to collaborate and coordinate. Don't ask your employees not to come to work and not act like they're a leader because they're in a position they don't want to be. Don't ask your employees to come to work and not be able to deal with conflict management. All of these pieces are important. So I'll share this at the end of the conversation, but one of the things we're starting to see is, as companies ask us, hey, what's the strategy? What's the solution? What's the resource that we should be thinking about next year? Really make it a blended approach. And so we're actually working with the organization right now. They already have executive coaches for all of their leaders. We're bringing in the resilience and the mindfulness and the well-being piece, and also bring in the EI piece so that they can serve those leaders even more effectively. So I think as you look into next year and what's going to be important, all of these pieces are important, and all of them are important for companies to holistically approach their employees.
I love this. I am really personally tickled to see communication on there. It's amazing how many people overlook that, and yet that is the source of so much stress in organizations. That's very unique to have that. Now, I want to share some sort of energizing news with folks. I shared, I think, in one of our velocity trainings recently, and you're a member of our velocity community. I was
Yeah.
talking about, I think it was Zig Ziglar who said, I'm not going to participate in this recession. And he said that in 2009 during the Great Recession. What's fascinating is how much business is happening out there. You guys have been incredibly, incredibly busy this year. In fact, there was a period of time, Fran, I didn't hear from you. I'm like, where's Fran? You had wave after wave coming in. You just had an experience last week that was pretty interesting. I would love for you to share that. Because it's really fascinating to just see the level of engagement that's going on with organizations these days, how many ways that you can connect with them and their interest level in many of these topics that a lot of people predicted at the beginning of the pandemic. Budgets would be slashed. Nobody would care about coaching. Nobody would care about training and development. Nobody would care about wellness. Really, the opposite has proved true. Talk about what happened for you last week and what you saw with your own eyes.
Absolutely. So part of what I saw was indicative of a quote, excuse me, that I heard from an industry partner that you know well, Virgin Pulse. Mm-hmm. And they had shared the fact that because of COVID, you're going to see a complete uptick in the way employees are actually not only addressing health, but the monies they're willing to put behind it and having more of a human experience. So last week, we were asked to be a part of a procurement conference. It was a conference that is a very well-known procurement organization. They bring together all the acquisition buyers in a particular region. And these acquisition buyers, as you can imagine, they're buying for government, they're buying for state, they're buying for local. Some of them are buying for individual entities. Most of them have a spend, I would say, north of 25 million, north of 25. So they're very, very, they're tasked with heavy responsibilities, spending the money well. You know, if you've worked in procurement, if you've worked with procurement officers, they have, I think, one of the toughest jobs in organizations, having coached them, having coached them, trained them. I mean, it's tough. And so I shared a quote with them before we got into what we call the Aerobodies wellbeing experience, and it blew me away how they responded. The quote came from Cigna. Cigna did a really interesting study in September 2020. They released it. It's the largest U.S. survey on resilience that's ever been done on America's working adults. And the survey showed, and I shared this with the procurement officials, that only 37% of full-time workers in America have high resilience.
Wow.
Resilience is commonly defined as abilities to quickly recover from challenges, and it's been the theme and ongoing theme for 2020. So this was the really telling piece of the report. If anybody wants it, I can send you the link. It says, without the ability to cope with challenges, adults are also more likely to experience stress, anxiety, depression, and resort to negative coping strategies such as social withdrawal and or substance and alcohol abuse. So I shared that at the outset of the conference. I had a short vignette. And then as the days went on, it was a 3-day conference, we had what we called the Aerobodies Wellbeing Experience. And we stood up different experiences that were all about human interaction, allowing the attendees to be able to come to a coaching session. We did a group coach with myself around mindfulness and well-being. We did another coaching session around them just being able to do like a chair seated Pilates and yoga. And then the third one was about an energy boost each day. And it was at different times of the day. I really liked the way they did their conference because they mixed the times up and people could go away and then come back, and then they had a happy hour. It was really cool. Each day, there were close to 200 attendees. Each day, we had nearly 60% attendance.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
It's shocking because, you know, when you hit nearly 100 people in attendance, it has to make you stand back as a provider to say, what's going on? These people, obviously, like I said, they're very highly tasked. They have major accountability in organizations. They're responsible for the major spend in organizations. There was one agency procurement officer, I think his spend is over 500 million. I mean, it's just, the numbers are gargantuan. But to me, I thought it was very telling of their need to take care of themselves, their need to be able to take something back to their employees. We've set up some executive briefings with some of them to take this back to their teams. And also for their need for information, right? To see, how do I better take care of myself? How do I build my own resilience? I get it. I'm not there yet. I need tools. I need a toolkit. What can you give me? So to me, it was our team, you know, we were obviously, you can imagine, super excited. These are all buyers. This is a great problem.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that was awesome. But more than that, I think it made me think as an innovator and a creator in this space. I've been in it over 20 years. You know, what else can we do to really help today's worker? They're facing a lot, you know, and some of them, in some cases, the feedback was, you know, I feel like I'm all alone. I'm very isolated. What else do you have for me? So it was a responsibility that I felt as a solution provider to provide really strong, vetted, solid solutions, because people really need it. They're crying and begging for it.
That there is so much gold in what you just shared. I want to try to unpack a few things. There was a question here from Sheena. Can you just reshare that statistic again? And everyone does want the link to that. So everyone is, so what is, say that statistic, what percentage of American employees?
Only 37%.
37%.
And it looks like Nicholas shared it. So Nicholas, you've seen it.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. There we go.
Yeah.
And so that's perfect, Nicholas. Thank you. One of our new fire starters. And so let me also ask you this. When you say they're feeling alone, this is the decision makers. Just to clarify that point, you're saying the decision makers, the buyers, are feeling very isolated and alone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
And I think people should pause with that, because everyone on your call, or I would say a majority, many of them maybe small business owners. I think oftentimes as small business owners, we rush in thinking, okay, it's all about everybody else. But these are people, right?
yeah.
And if they see a need for themselves, it's obvious they're going to take it back to their team, because they know that they are in need of it. But secondly, I had one buyer who reached out to us and said, can you send me some tools now, things that I can take back to leadership that they can put in place? Not only was leadership present at the conference, but we worked with their organization, I would say probably 7 years ago. And leadership was convinced that we've got this taken care of, we're under control. Where obviously this procurement official felt just the opposite, because she's asking us for tools. So, a lot of times when you're talking to the decision makers, don't negate the decision maker, right? Then the decision maker themselves could be someone that could be an additional resource for you in those organizations to help you look broad in the organization, not just in one area. And I think as a company, that's how we've really been able to grow and capitalize, because I see the individual, I have a conversation with them and what's important with them, and then we look at the organization breadth, and then they see us as a trusted partner.
Oh, I love those words, right? The trusted partner. When you've established that, that's like the be all end all. The other thing about this, and I know you use executive roundtables. We've been talking about this for years, but I have to put a plug in for executive roundtables. People are always asking me, why do decision makers want to come to executive roundtables? And one of the reasons is because they're isolated. Typically, a leader in an organization is the only person who's charged with whatever their key task is, whatever they're a key driver of something in the organization. And so they're an island within the organization, and the opportunity, the fact that you had 60% attendance, that people were coming in. And one of the things I think you said, and correct me again if I'm wrong, but when we were in the green room before the show, you mentioned that this event was put together rather quickly. This was not even a long planned event. And I think that responsiveness right now, the opportunity that those who are leading movements to bring people together, Fran, to help them navigate these situations, to give them tools where they need tools, and even just to engage in that dialogue to find out what they don't know. I mean, you must have walked away from last week just with the gears turning of all the things that you and your team can now do to support these organizations and really where they most need you.
Absolutely. And I'll give a plug, back to you and your organization, Corporate Agent, and the Velocity Group, particularly in the Facebook group, because one of the things you shared a lot, I think in the beginning of the year on Seize the Moment, you mentioned the importance of really being up to date with studies. Look at what's trending, what people are talking about, what's McKinsey talking about, what's Deloitte talking about, really understanding that. Look at what Virgin Pulse is talking about. These may be competitors to you, but what are they talking about? Because their bandwidth may be much larger. They may have a whole communications team that's looking at what's current. They're going out and looking at that education. And when I'm able to take these studies back and talk to them very frankly about the studies, this is not Aerobodies, right? I didn't create this to get your business. This is what is happening. I think it really makes the decision makers look at you a little bit differently. With a little bit more lens of credibility, because you understand and you're there to educate. What comes out of it is fine. I say this, lightly, but if you don't give us business right now, it's really okay. I'm like, really, we've got enough going on. But let's have a conversation. Let me tell you what I'm seeing with my customers and what's working for them and what's really making a difference for them. And I applaud you for helping us in the community really think strategically about how to help our clients. It's not just they call and give them a solution and give them a proposal. No, let's back up. Let's talk a little bit about, what's the impact you're trying to make? What's really happening in the trends? What are people really talking about? And how will this shape your organization 3 years from now, not just in 6 months?
Yep. I thank you for sharing that. Thank you for saying that. And I get so excited when I see leaders like you in the industry really changing the dialogue with these decision makers. It's really how you establish that trusted partner, that trusted advisor relationship. And then everything sort of changes about the way that you serve these organizations. So speaking of that, when you look at the C-suite, so one of the things you guys are doing at Aerobodies is you're really looking at how you partner with the leaders, how you incorporate wellness into the C-suite, how it trickles down from the C-suite down. What can you share about that you think is most important for organizations to be looking at?
Great question. So there's a couple of things that I'm noticing as trends that leaders, the organizations, like I said, that are kind of getting it and they're not looking at the old boilerplate. They're really kind of rolling up their sleeves, throwing out the old stuff. Let's start anew. They're doing things like, I'm sure you may have heard of storytelling town halls, where they literally get everyone together and they have real conversations. What comes out of that is that that leader is now transparently apparent to the employees in the workforce. The employees can actually say, hey, this is what's really going on for me. And then what we do in strategy is talk to them about, okay, so you got all this data dump of information. Now, what do we do with it, right? We're doing something called cultural wellness assessments. So yeah, you feel like your organization, you're on the right track, but what's the pulse count of the wellness of your organization? And how does that affect the diversity? What you're doing for someone who's in India versus someone who's in Belgium versus someone who's in Canada, like a conference I attended last week, versus someone who's in San Francisco. How you approach wellness is going to be very different. So for us, this year we pulled the reins back and kind of went back to something that we reluctantly did because we're not really big in the digital space, and we stood up a digital platform, which is more of a diverse platform, right? So our speak to these organizations is that, okay, you recognize that you have employees all over the bandwidth and all over the map. How do you speak to them from an inclusivity standpoint that speaks to them and not just who you think you are as an organization? And I think, to Sheryl Sandberg's point, organizations that get that, then that's where our conversation starts. How are you going to touch someone in remote Idaho or in Chicago versus someone who's in Great Britain? And those are the kinds of companies we work with. They have large footprints. So they really do have to have a conversation from that level.
I hope you all caught some of the things that Fran was just saying in there, because there are some $1 million ideas in there for all of you, including that storytelling town hall. I hope all of you jotted that down. Let me ask you this. One of the things that I feel like that has really distinguished Aerobodies from some other organizations, because let's be honest, the employee wellness space is very crowded. But you all have continued to distinguish yourselves. And one of the things that you've done is really use diagnostics, critical diagnostics. And I think that's a really important thing. If they're not measuring the value of their employee wellness programs, whether we're talking about emotional, physical, or mental, because you guys are working across all three of those layers. But you really have looked at those diagnostics. What do you think is most important now? And then what about when we are going to see a return to the offices, especially with Pfizer's announcement? Some of the, we're getting close. We're getting close to making some therapeutic breakthroughs from the pharmaceutical world. So what are those diagnostics, and how are you guys incorporating measurement to help companies build business cases around this?
That's a great question. I have another slide.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
I was on a really interesting telecall 2 weeks ago with Herman Miller Furniture. To your point around what's happening now, what companies are thinking about. Can everybody see that? Are you good? Resiliency.
I actually can't see it yet. Can you hit? Okay, now I can see it. No, now I got it. Oh, that's beautiful. Yep.
Yeah. So when you think about what we do, again, this is how we approach it, because again, every company is a little bit different, and what they need from an assessment scorecard piece may be different. I was blown away by this presentation by Herman Miller, because they're literally looking at the footprint of organizations and how they reconfigure furniture, and they're on the upswing. Like, you would think no one's in these offices, and so why would people be buying furniture? Not so true, because they're looking at how employers want to reassess when they do bring people back to work, what that looks like. And so they're doing things like this asset review we have here. We do asset reviews when it comes to well-being programs, what they already have in place. We do productivity scorecards and things of that nature. We do, obviously the coaching and training piece. So again, I think it's really important for business owners to really look at not just what the solutions are you can provide, but look at what organizations are already doing. Maybe there's a legacy program. How do you go in and audit that and then provide some sort of recommendation or a diagnostic to them? Don't go in and automatically think you have to have all the ideas. I always tell my team, look, you don't need to be the most brilliant person in the room. I hate being the most brilliant person in the room because I'm not learning anything else. So I want to see what other people are doing. How do we perhaps tweak that a little bit? Perhaps save them some money, which companies always love that because you keep their business longer because they see that you have really become a value-added partner. But then you roll up your sleeves and really create strategy. So I created this slide with that in mind, just to think about, how we provide solutions and how other organizations think about how they do that strategy piece and that audit piece going forward.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. Monica, I could not agree more with you. Monica just said, Fran Dean Bishop, you are a genius. She is. She absolutely is, Monica. Every time I am around Fran, she shifts my mindset in so many ways. You did just blow my mind. Obviously, you know me and that I think I'm a designer in my spare time. So I'm obsessed with Herman Miller, all things Herman Miller. You actually threw me for a loop there. I would have guessed that they were mostly sitting around trying to figure out how to offload too much inventory. This is why we do this show, because, we can't be in all places and see all things. So that blew my mind a little bit. And I think, the other thing is, Deloitte came out just about a week ago with some statistics, Fran, showing that most CEOs are actually predicting they're going to be back at pre-pandemic revenue numbers by June or July of 2021. I keep saying that to people because that means they're in a go mode right now. Like companies are in a go mode, and you just, all the way down to furniture of looking at what does this look like when, and obviously Herman Miller with so much of their ergonomic pieces and very, they take a very human approach to their design. I have to ask you a question. And you may not be able to answer this. This is okay if you can't. But I'm always telling people to get themselves on webinars where they can get, inside scoops. I'm curious, was that a public facing webinar, or was that through an industry association that Herman Miller hosted that webinar?
It was a industry association. However, I believe I have to go back. I believe they had links out to their website to show it, because obviously they're in the business of selling furniture, right? So they have a lot of studies that they're posting that they showcase and they noted on post-COVID dynamics and it was amazing. I mean, I was, we have a couple offices ourselves, but I was just blown away with how they are reconfiguring modular furniture to provide the social distancing, but make people feel inclusive and connected. I mean, it was very interesting because they had stats. They had done population studies. They had done configuration studies. And it was really interesting. They had partnered with a couple construction firms. So it really realized that, as a small business, always never stop. Now. Think 18 months from now. And, that's why I always tell people, in the government space, if you're looking to get into government, you got to be thinking 18 months because it takes that long to break in. It really does. And you're not going to break in 6 months unless it's, it's by pure whatever. You're not going to break in that quickly. But you have to be thinking out 18 months. And obviously these big companies, if you think about how they're thinking about strategy, their footprint is already there. They can't, throw their company away. And so they're doing that, and they're partnering with organizations who obviously want to bring people back, but bring people back so they feel safe, so they feel comfortable, so they feel inclusive. I mean, just all of it. So it really helped me realize that from a holistic standpoint, yeah, we're going to be in this virtual environment for a while, but as we move back, what do we do to provide solutions and get in and partner now with organizations? And they realize that, you know what, Aerobodies is there to stay. They can really help us in the bandwidth and the long term in terms of making our employees feel better once they come back into the workplace.
So good. So good. I want to take some questions. If those of you watching want to ask Fran a question, I'd love to take your questions. So you can just type them into the chat area and we can grab some of those questions. Fran, what should I have asked you about the employee physical, mental, and emotional health and well-being space that I did not ask you today that we absolutely need to talk about?
So for those, okay, that's a great question. I think for those who are on the call who are wondering, you know, how do I get in? Where do I get in? Where's my space? In fact, I took a call from a Velocity member of yours last week who said, you know what, your company is so big. How do I even get there? And that was just funny to me. As one of your clients, you know, that was kind of funny. But anyway, I said, you know what, you got to start somewhere. There's plenty of opportunity. You know, like I referenced Virgin Pulse earlier. They're one of the largest health and wellness providers in the world, right? They work with thousands of companies, but they don't have my clients, right? And my clients are global companies who see something that I bring to the table that's a nuance that they may not be able to get from a global organization. So when you think about what you're going to do and how you're going to approach perhaps this industry or any industry, what is it that you bring that's your sweet spot, your niche, your special sauce that's really different than the way other companies think? And I know what it is for us. You know, your listeners have to figure out what it is for them. But I think that's really important when you think about how you serve your customers well. They don't want the same old thing. Everybody's doing the same old thing. My field is, as Angelique has said, I mean, you know, it's saturated. It's overly saturated. So I really have to think outside the box. I hate that outside the box, but I have to really think innovatively and how I best serve my customers.
And what do you think? Let me talk to the corporate decision makers right now, and even some of the government, but let's talk to the corporate decision makers for just a second.
Mhm.
Today is November 11th. So we have 7 weeks left in the year. Thank
Yep.
gosh, thank gosh, because I'm so done with
Yes,
2020. We all
yes,
are, right?
I
And then
agree.
I'm going to take Shireen's question here. But, you know, it's the last 7 weeks of the year. What would be the top, like the number one thing that you would tell every leader that they should figure out or take action on between now and December 31st?
Sit down with an organization like ours, someone on your team, or create some sort of, I would say, small group think tank in your organization. It does take more. I find a lot of times as HR managers, and HR managers are tasked with so much. They're like procurement officials. They're tasked with so much. But then when they try to take on the wellness piece, it's almost like it's just throwing it in there, and employees see the difference. It doesn't work that way. So sit down with a thought leader or an organization like ours to start talking about strategy. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. Maybe you join an executive roundtable briefing, attend a webinar, but you need to get in a space where you can talk to leaders who are having to make these critical decisions, organizations who are providing the critical solutions, and see what's working. I'm still blown away with how many organizations and HR managers may work in a silo and try to figure it out by throwing things at the paint, you know, at the wall and thinking that employees want that. I mean, come on, you don't want it. So what would make you think the employees would want that? And the other thing is, nobody wants you to look at, you know, their biometrics or their health record or know what they're doing. So as HR people, please stop doing that. Stop doing it. It doesn't
That is such a contrarian message, Fran, but it's a brilliant one. You know me, I love contrarian messages, right? Like I love when we say everyone is drinking the Kool-Aid and we as experts come in and say, wait a second. No, you're really one of the first people who I've heard say that. In fact, so many of these tech companies out there, all they're doing is trying to put wearables on everyone so that the person in HR knows how much water you drank today. I mean, I don't, who wants that? I think it's such a great point.
Yeah.
Shireen has a fabulous question here. What sources should we be looking at to curate information, data, and studies to share with clients? And I love this question because this is how you establish yourself as a thought leader, even commenting on it. What are some of your favorite sources, Fran?
Well, as I mentioned before, I love the McKinsey, the Deloitte, the Ernst & Young studies. I read a plethora of periodicals. That's my go to bed usually. Financial Times. I find if you read financial magazines and literature, a lot of times they will always tie back the business case. And one of the top questions I get from buyers of our service before they can bring it in and present it to leadership is, how do I make the case to leadership that we need this? And I always say it's a business case, because most people are thinking wellness, health, oh, it's fitness, oh, it's frou-frou. Why do we need to spend money on that? So you have to make the business case. They're not going to spend 50 grand, $500,000, $1 million or more on well-being, resilience, and health if you don't make the business case. And so you need to find those financial sources to tie it back. So I would say start with those. Even your Wall Street Journal, start with those, but put in your search engine what it is specifically. What are the keywords that you're looking for? For me, it's resilience, it's well-being, it's trust, it's emotional intelligence, it's EQ, and bringing that all together. But for your organization, it could be something totally different.
Well, and to that end, I'm sure you guys have some Google alerts set up on some of these keywords, because that Cigna statistic that you shared, people wouldn't necessarily think, oh, I should go to Cigna's website today and see if they put out a press release about a new study. But when you set up those Google alerts and you have those keywords, the year and study, when something new comes out, you're going to catch it, which is so powerful. Business Wire's website, by the way, you guys, and PR Newswire's website is often where the big brands are releasing their big news. And Market Watch, I'm just going to throw a couple out there for you guys. I love Market Watch. I'm a big Yahoo Finance reader, as you can imagine, since I often pre-pandemic and soon to be post-pandemic am a panelist on Yahoo Finance's Wi-Fi PM show. But it's that I'm so glad you talked about the financial piece of this, Fran, because no matter what it is, employees are the most expensive resource. Everybody wants to say they're the most valuable resource. Let's be clear, they're the most expensive resource that an organization has. So when you're doing something for people, it's pretty easy actually to build a business case around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
and we have a new coin phrase, and I think this goes across all industries: one size no longer fits all. So when you're talking to decision makers, in my space, a lot of times I'm asked, what's the best solution? How do I approach it? And I use this scenario. If you have an employee, you have a mom that's at home that has 2 kids, what's going to work for her for resiliency and well-being is going to be very different for a mother, a woman who is a CEO of a company, who's married to a first responder, who's also a caregiver. That's my circumstance. Which may be very different from a father who is just a father of one and married to a stay-at-home mom. Those cases are very different, right? So what's going to work for those employees is going to be very different. It's the same in every industry. So one size no longer fits all. If you can really help your leadership understand that, and your clients understand that, and really get into a strategic conversation with them, there's no question it will be a value-added partnership.
Such good advice. Where and how can leaders from government and other organizations get in touch with you, and how can people follow you if they want? You're an inspiration, Fran. What your company has been able to achieve is just really mind-blowing. I think we really did break people's brains a little bit at the beginning of today's show, when we talked about all the things your company has done over the last 20 years. So how can leaders of organizations, government agencies get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn is the easiest, right? So reach out to me, Fran Dean Bishop at LinkedIn. We also have a company page there where we curate and provide a lot of latest information if you want to reach us there. Our website, as Angelique knows, we've put a lot of investment into our website. So there's a lot of information there. I also mentioned that we recently stood up a new technology. So if you go to our website and just feel around, you can find a lot of information. You can reach out there. My email is franb@aerobodies.com. So feel free to reach out to me direct if you have any questions or anything like at all. And I'm always happy to have a conversation and see how we can support and help.
Oh my gosh, Fran, you are just, oh my goodness, in a league all of your own. And it's just such an honor to have you on the show. You've been so generous with all that you've shared. I can't say enough. Thank you so much for being on.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who came on the call today.
Thanks, guys, for being here with us, for all your great comments and your phenomenal questions. We will be back here again next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see you guys then. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.